So let's call to order the special board meeting for the District 128 Board of Education for Monday, January 4th, 2021. If I could ask for everyone to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for
which it stands,
one
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call, please.
Jim Batson.
Here.
Don Carmichael.
Here.
Pat Grudy.
Here.
Lisa Hessel.
Here.
Kevin Huber.
Here.
Karen Lundstedt.
Here.
Casey Rooney.
Here.
Okay, great. We know we have all board members present this evening. Our agenda, we will open it up for public comment, and I believe we have 4 comments. Is that what I heard?
3.
3 comments, okay. And so we'll read those into the record. We're really here tonight to welcome our new superintendent. So this is an extremely exciting and happy meeting. Great way to start off the new year, I'll add. And then I want to bring the team up to speed on our diagnostic testing plans. Denise, for your purposes, we will be reopening schools on January 19th to students. And as part of that, we will be screening our students weekly for COVID-19. All right, so over the last couple of weeks, we've just had a whole lot of activity to try to put that together. And over the next week and a half, there will be a whole lot of activity to put that program together. So we want to formally sign off the contract to implement that testing this evening. And then we want to have a very brief conversation about our upcoming January committee and board meetings. Okay? And that should do it. All right, so I am proposing that we have a relatively short meeting tonight. All in favor?
Great idea.
Okay. All right.
Now that you've said it, Pat.
No,
You had to say that,
It's
Pat.
going to happen. It's going to happen. All right. Okay. So let's open it up for public comment, and I'll turn it over to Mary to read the 3 comments that we received from residents.
Okay, thanks, Pat. The first comment we have is from Cindy Bull, who writes, "Can we be assured for second semester the in-school hybrid model will be in effect? E-learning has been extremely damaging for my child. Thank you."
Mary to do communications.
The next comment is from Garrett Self. "Dear Board of Education, as you reconvene, I strongly urge you to continue to hold true to your agreed on direction of opening for hybrid classes on January 19th. The most recent Lake County Health Department data supports the decision with positive trends for our community as of today. 1, the number of daily new cases are the lowest they've been since mid-October in Lake County. 2, the incidence rate in D128 affected zip codes 60061 and 60048 are the lowest they have been since October and remain 25 to 40% lower than Lake County as a whole. 3, new daily deaths attributed to COVID-19, while all regrettable, are now back below 2, on par with levels seen all the way back to June after the November spike. And 4, among the roughly 24 Lake County zip codes, D128 primary zip codes are the lowest in all of Lake County, save 2 to 3. If you are true to the notion of following the data, that is the objective data. You have my full support for hybrid on January 19th and more as soon as possible. Thank you, Garrett Self." And our last comment is from Kristen Cresswell-Isberg. "Thank you again for your continued commitment to our children during this highly stressful time. There's finally some light, but it still will be some time before we can all let our guard down. I write this to encourage Superintendent Lee and the board to continue remote learning into the second semester instead of transitioning to hybrid later this month as planned. COVID-19 spread peaked around Thanksgiving, and through behavior modifications, we managed to bring down the incidence rate, but the effect of Christmas and New Year's on numbers has yet to be realized. Viral presence in our community is still too high to consider bringing people together indoors. New data coming out of England shows that viral mutations have resulted in a virus that is even more contagious and possibly more virulent to children than the original virus. This mutation is here. We just do not know the extent to which it has taken hold because of our country's lack of sequencing surveillance. Hopefully, this lack of data will be corrected shortly. However, we must be concerned that our children could now be at greater risk than in the past. A study out of South Korea demonstrates that this virus can be transmitted at a distance of 21 feet with only 5 minutes of exposure time. Because of this strict and invasive monitoring of its population through phone data, credit card data, video monitoring, and robust contact tracing, researchers were able to follow the movements and interactions of the virus carrier and those who were subsequently infected. This information is compelling and demonstrates that the 6-foot separation protocol may be insufficient to protect students and teachers in an indoor environment. Considering the possibility of severe consequences of COVID-19 disease and the aerosolized contagious nature of this virus, we should do all we can to protect our students, teachers, staff, administration, and family members. Remote learning delivers a more seamless educational experience and is at less risk of significant disruption from teachers and students being quarantined or becoming ill. Under the current conditions, it offers all students a better and safer educational experience than hybrid can offer. Thank you again for your hard work on behalf of all of our children. And that's all.
Okay.
Pat Grudy, President.
All right, so I just going to make one comment. So yes, there has been some favorable, I don't have a detailed metrics presentation, but one thing I do want to share, according to the Northwestern website, where we've looked at the data most recently, the Libertyville positivity rate is still running upwards of 10%, whereas Vernon Hills is actually closer to 6%. So while those numbers actually have come down from their peak, they still remain somewhat elevated relative to the metrics threshold. All right, but having said that, I want to just reassure our community that our plan remains to open on January 19th, unless the governor takes action to close schools in Illinois, which frankly, I don't expect. So we'll see. But today I think was a milestone day. I don't know whether Tom and John, you want to make a very quick comment, but today was the day that we had our teachers back in the buildings. So that was exciting. And, you know, I just, again, I want to reassure everybody, we remain on track for our January 19th start date.
Prentice Lee, Superintendent.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we could do the additional comments after we work with Denise here.
Sure. Okay. So on to the good news of the evening. Over the last almost, I don't know, a month and a half, roughly 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we've been working really hard to do the very challenging task of replacing Dr. Lee as our superintendent. And I'll just speak for myself. When we started that process, it was quite intimidating because quite honestly, those are big shoes to fill. Prentice has just been a great superintendent for us for a large number of years. And we really weren't sure what sort of candidates we were going to be able to find. And so we engaged a consulting firm, is actually led by our former superintendent, Dr. David Clough, and his colleague, Dr. Linda Yankee. They did a tremendous job. We had, I think, 35 candidates that they screened from a national search. After interviewing, I think we interviewed 8 candidates. We narrowed it down to 3 absolutely outstanding finalists, all of whom were just excellent. And from those 3, we have found what we believe to be just a phenomenal replacement for Dr. Lee. And actually, I think the word I got to use is exciting. I think the more you get to know Dr. Denise Herman, you'll understand why I use the term exciting and passionate, because I think those are the words that really come to mind when we describe her. So we are announcing tonight that Dr. Denise Herman will replace Dr. Lee in July 1st. And maybe this is part of my bias, but she is a BS chemist in training. All right, Denise, you may not know this about me, but I'm actually an organic chemist. She got her master's in chemistry and doctorate in education and curriculum leadership from Northern Illinois in DeKalb. She received her superintendent certificate from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She is currently the associate superintendent for learning and teaching in St. Charles Community Unit School, District 303. She began her career in District 303 as a chemistry teacher, then the science department chair, and then assistant principal. And then prior to returning to the Midwest, she did a stint in the beautiful state of California, where she served as superintendent of Roselle Joint Union High School District in Roselle, California, where she oversaw the education of 10,500 students in 5 comprehensive high schools, 1 alternative, 1 independent online, and 1 adult school. She also served as assistant superintendent for instruction at Fremont Unified School District in Fremont, California. And in that role, she oversaw the teaching and learning of over 36,000 students across 42 sites. Previously, she was principal of the Henry M. Gunn High School in Palo Alto, California, where she integrated social emotional learning into school practices to support the school community and improve student wellness. She also served as a principal at a high school in Middleton, Wisconsin. And to say the least, she's just absolutely passionate about equity, innovation, and wellness. So Denise will take the formal action to approve your contract this evening, but on behalf of everyone on the screen tonight and on behalf of our community, I want to welcome you. We are truly excited to have you join this outstanding team. And we know you are exactly the kind of person we need to take this very, very good school district and make it even better. So on behalf of everybody, welcome. It's just absolutely great to have you here.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed every conversation that I had with all of you in December as we were going through the interview process and everything I learned about District 128. I am absolutely thrilled and excited to be joining the district. I look forward to the opportunity to take all the things we've learned through this COVID crisis and, combine it with all of the wonderful traditions that are already taking place in District 128 and just make sure that we surpass learning for all students. Great things are in our future, and I look forward to joining your fantastic district team.
Great. Welcome. Great to have, just absolutely fantastic to have you. Can't say enough. Okay.
So Pat, the motion, whoever's ever going to make the motion tonight, we're doing 2 things. We're voting, and I think the motion can be together, but to appoint Denise and then approve her contract.
Okay. So can I ask, is there a motion to A, appoint Dr. Denise Herman as superintendent of District 128 effective July 1st, 2021? And B, to approve her contract as submitted to you in your pre-board meeting packet?
So moved.
Happy to make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? No, hearing none. Okay, roll call, please.
Carmichael.
Aye.
Grudy.
Aye.
Hessel.
Aye.
Huber.
Aye.
Lundstedt.
Aye.
Rooney.
Aye.
Batson.
Aye.
Is that everybody? All right, motion carries. Congratulations, Denise. Welcome aboard.
Yay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This is the best New Year's Eve gift, way to start the year that I've had. So I really am so thrilled to be joining your team.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you, and it's great news for us to start the year out this way too. It's so much fun to actually have great news to celebrate. So, all right, you're free to stay, go, whatever you would like to do. It's totally up to you. Okay, All right, so let's move on. I'm going to ask Bryant to pull up a few slides. As we mentioned, it's been a very dynamic 2 weeks on the whole testing front. Last time we met, we had talked about two options. One was to roll out the Shield Illinois program, and the other was as a backup to basically consider using the Abbott Binax Now Rapid Antigen test for weekly screening of our students. Okay. At that time, we, I think, were in favor of the Shield Illinois program. But since that meeting, there have been a couple developments. One, there was a delay in their receipt of, in fact, they still, I don't believe, have received their FDA emergency use authorization. Okay. That in and of itself is not really a deal killer. We had talked to them about using the test anyway. If not for a diagnostic test, at least as a way to screen people in a non-diagnostic sense. But the more critical issue was they were unable to commit to a start date in January, and it was looking at best, it was likely going to be sometime in February before they could actually support our needs. All right. So simultaneous with that, there were a couple of, I'll call them breakthroughs on the Abbott front. As you know, the big issue on the Abbott test was we were unable to get access to that material. The federal government bought the first 150 million tests. Those have been allocated to states and then allocated to local public health departments. And A, there just hadn't been enough to go around, and B, there were just a number of delays in terms of how those were being allocated. So we could not get access to the volume of testing that we needed. Two things happened. One, Abbott actually introduced a home health version of the test. I don't know, some of you may have read about that.
Pat Grudy, President.
And the home health version actually involved them partnering with a healthcare provider who would essentially watch a person self-sample at home and run the test at home. Okay. And while that afforded a number of logistical advantages, upon further discussion, we opted to remain with our program recommendation, which is to sample students and staff on our facilities, because we really felt that was the best way to ensure compliance with the protocols and things like that. All right. So then the second thing that happened is, through a number of conversations by both myself and our healthcare provider, we were able to, we believe, secure access to the volume of testing that we need, which will allow us to start testing on time. And on time, the plan would be to initiate testing of staff next week, and then to initiate the testing of students the first week of class. So that would start on January 19th. We would sample on site, and test results would be available to students within 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, so even better than the U of I test, which would have been either the next day or day after. We'll literally be able to give students the results in the next 15 minutes. All right, so based on all those considerations, we're making the recommendation we proceed with the Binax Now testing done by Passport Health. Brian, if you could bring up those slides.
The school board meeting will continue in a moment. The school board meeting will continue in a moment. The school board meeting will continue in a moment.
Do you see it, Pat? No.
I just see you guys.
No, can't see it, BK.
It was trying to show, but it went away.
It says sharing your screen, but it's not, it's only black.
Technical difficulties with Zoom meeting.
Well,
Pat Grudy, President.
Here it is.
That's good.
sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, so again, let me just review the performance of the test because it's real important to understand, you know, no test is perfect, okay? The test of the Abbott Binax Now test is about 97% sensitive, all right? So that basically says it's going to detect most of the infections that are basically on or near the point at which somebody becomes symptomatic. The specificity performance is about 98.5%. Again, these are very preliminary performance characteristics developed early on as this test was developed. So that means, frankly, we have to make sure we understand we will miss some positives and we will have some false positives. That's just the nature of the beast, and that's true whether you use this test or any other test. But I think when you're screening weekly, there's every reason to expect that you will find a number of asymptomatic people that are actually potentially spreading the virus. I mentioned why we went with Binax Now. A couple of program highlights. As I mentioned, we're going to collect and test on site. So everything will be done in the two high schools. We'll get the results within 15 to 30 minutes. The results actually will be reported to the students via what's called the Navica app. So that's what's shown in the cell phone in the picture there. And that app, when you get a negative result, is green. I believe if you get a positive result, you get a response from Navica and your app turns red. Okay. So you can essentially use that as a passport, let's say, as you enter the building. I will mention, again, we're not going to require this test. We believe we're unable to do that, although I know some schools are taking action and are requiring such testing. We believe our participation rate, based on our surveys, will be high enough that we should be okay. We may not get 100% participation, but we think we'll get upwards of 80%. And so that will give us a very good population to screen. All right. Positives, and this is important, positives are going to be treated as presumptive positives. And what I mean by that is, if a student gets a positive result, all that really means is that's an indication that they're supposed to return back to the testing center. Okay. And until they get a second positive result, which is a confirmatory test, which may be the same test, or more likely it will be a different technology which they can run on site. Only in the case of them getting back-to-back positives will we consider those confirmed positives, okay? So we really feel we can mitigate the risk of potential false positive results by just treating those as presumptive positives, which need to be confirmed. All right, and the confirmation testing will be done by our healthcare provider, Passport Health. And again, the preliminary plan is that they will conduct that confirmatory testing on site, immediately within that day. And then depending on the results, we'll take whatever actions are necessary for quarantine and contact tracing and all those good things. Okay, so that's the program. Next slide.
Pat Grudy, President.
These are the same volumes that I showed in the last meeting. Again, I'm assuming we're going to get about a third of our students back at Vernon Hills. That means roughly we got to test about 420 students a week. At Libertyville, I'm assuming still about 70%. And I am hearing those numbers may be slightly higher here as we start second semester. So that's a little over 1,000 students. Throw into that about 90% of our staff. So that's about another 400. So big picture, round number, we're probably looking at doing about, just under 2,000 tests a week. Okay. Next slide.
Pat Grudy, President.
So what's it going to cost? Actually, there was some good news. Actually, the Binax Now was actually a little less expensive as well. So it's $20 a test. I think we were looking at $27 a test for the Shield, Illinois test with the provider's cost rolled in there. So that $20 a test is inclusive of the provider cost. They're going to provide all the PPE for their testing staff. It'll be a physician signed and, say overviewed protocol. And they'll provide client education materials as we need to. We'll then pay for a testing team. It's about $50 an hour for each testing team. So it's about another $300 a day. That should give us a capacity of probably just under 500 samples a day. So again, if you look at Libertyville, we're going to probably need 2 teams for 4 days, I think, at LHS.
Yeah.
And then, because that 80 samples per hour actually assumes 2 teams. So we need to do pretty close to the 480 samples a day. Frankly, we think after the first week or two, that could go even quicker because it's a very straightforward process. Basically, what's going to happen is each student is going to self-swab under the direction of the healthcare provider. And then once they collect that specimen, the healthcare provider will actually run the test right there, right on site. And then for Vernon Hills, we think we're going to probably need somewhere between 1 and 2 days of a single team to run those tests. All right. So that means our estimated weekly cost actually just for the testing is about $40,000 a week. It's about another $3,000, I think, a week across the two sites to actually have the teams on site for collection and testing. So if we assume that we are going to run the program at a minimum until the end of March, and then we kind of evaluate its effectiveness and whether or not we think it's actually adding the value that we need going forward, and run it as late as the end of May, just prior to graduation, the cost of the program overall is probably somewhere in that $400,000 to $800,000 range in total. Okay. So, and I'll put that in perspective for everybody. That's about equivalent to what we would normally charge our students for fees. So at $20 a test, we run
Pat Grudy, President.
20 tests? I mean, you're talking about $400 a kid in order to run the program. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. Are there any questions from everybody on that?
I got a quick one, and this is probably for Dan. Is there any of the new funding coming out of the CARES Act or out of the federal government funding that could help offset some of this cost?
Yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
That was part of the package, but I don't know how much yet it would get sent on to us. So I'm guessing we'll get that in the next couple of weeks. But we do have some funding to help offset that. Even Lake County, I think, is going to get more money, and they probably will send it our way like they did last time. So we'll have some more funding to offset it. But honestly, like those are somewhat immaterial offsets. You know, it's not going to be anywhere near what the cost of this is. But again, you know, just for everyone and even for Dr. Herman, we are fortunate to be in a financial position that even doing this on the high end will not affect our financial strength or stability in any meaningful way in the short term. So.
Pat Grudy, President.
And Jim, I think the great unknown also is what the Biden administration might do with respect to COVID funding. I mean, he's making a priority of getting all schools open in the first 100 days. Given where the pandemic is, including what our resident said tonight about the new variant of the virus, which seems to spread even more quickly, it'll be interesting to see what, if any, action he takes, including funding for schools to do these kinds of programs.
Prentice Lee, Superintendent.
Pat, a couple of other things.
Yeah.
One, Pat and I and a couple of our operations team people worked with Dr. Morcott over break, both face-to-face. Pat and I and Eric Marosha at LHS actually visited Passport Health's office in Vernon Hills, where they had a kind of a testing center set up, what it would look like. Ole Stevens at LHS and Andy Young at Vernon Hills have been working with Passport Health Scheduler. So we had some administrators that were working, through the break. They also met with Dr. Morcott this morning. I think Tom and John were part of that meeting, so they got brought up to speed a little bit as well. But we've had a team working on logistics on this over break and during times we were closed. So we want to thank them for doing that because, as Pat mentioned, this really turned on a dime. Pat, really 24, 36 hours, really the news came out, and it's very, very exciting. The other thing I want to say, and the board is aware of this, but anybody's from watching from the public, Pat has worked diligently on this since July. And he has never wavered and never stopped working on this. And the result of that work is where we're at right now. And, we ought to stop and thank Pat. I know we've done that, but we need to do that. Again, I can tell you, Pat and I have had many, many phone calls on this. But beyond that, Pat has been part of meetings at Abbott with U of I people. and doing other investigative work to get us to this point. So Pat, on behalf of us, all of us, including the board, thank you very much for your work. We very much appreciate it. And without it, we would not be here right now. So thank you.
You know, you're
Thank
very
you, Pat.
welcome. I was happy to do it. I'm excited. I think this is just another indication. We're doing everything possible to make our environment as safe as possible, not only for our students, but our teachers and staff as well. And I think that's what we need to do. I really do. I feel very strongly about that. I will say, look, nothing's perfect. Everybody needs to understand this is just one more level of mitigation. All right. It still means that our social distancing efforts, wearing masks, all the things that we've been working so hard on for the last couple months are still essential to the overall control of this virus in our environment. But I think to the extent that we can identify cases, and look, let's be honest, it's not going to be a huge number of cases. All right. I think I've said this before, the estimates of the prevalence in the asymptomatic population is probably less than 0.5%. All right. So you can do the math, test in 2,000 people, how many that is. It's not a huge number. But I think for every case that we can identify, it really just helps us keep our schools open. And I think that's really what we need to do. So we're very fortunate that we're in a community where we can even make this decision. So really, I think the thanks go to all the taxpayers and people that support us and allow us to be able to make these kinds of decisions. But, we've been asked to lead. How many times have we heard from the community they want us to lead? I think this is leadership in the right way. I'm honestly excited to see this kicked off, but I'm most excited because I think it really says to our teachers, to our staff, to our students that we care so much about you. We're willing to make this investment.
Karen Lundstedt, Secretary.
So, Pat, I think, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, not only my thanks, but also just to really encourage our community. Thank you for so many who have already committed to participating. And I think one way that the community can just come behind this and make it as successful as it can be is to actually agree to be tested. My daughter, who lives in the UK, clearly we've all heard the news about everything shutting down now for another month and a half. Talked to us today about that. And I just think this is another, like you said, Pat, we've got a lot of mitigating factors already in place, and this is another one. But what it takes to be the most successful it can be is for everyone to participate. And so please join us, all of those of you who are watching, and those as we communicate that out to everyone, be a part of this team to make this as safe as we can have it be for everyone's benefit, and agree to be tested.
Yeah. And I didn't mention it is a nasal swab sample. All right. So it's not saliva, but it's a very easy nasal swab. It takes about 15 seconds to do, completely painless. And again, everybody will actually self-sample under the direction of the healthcare provider. So it's very, very easy to do.
Don Carmichael, School Board.
Pat, I have a question. Will this test be available to students who are learning remotely? Like, will they be able to come in, get the test, go back home?
Yeah, so good question, Don. I think, Prentice, jump in, but I believe my understanding is for those people who are participating in extracurricular activities on site, sports, for example, we will certainly make it available for them. I don't believe we are making it available to the other students, but anybody, Prentice?
That's correct, Pat, to start. And we may be able to manage that because we have to schedule everybody in. We have to know what the numbers are. And the other thing is, because we're a public school and it's the right thing to do, if we allow somebody that lives 3 blocks from school to come in, then we have an obligation to bus other kids in who can't get here. Yeah. And the doability of that is almost impossible at this point. So as I think you've heard us talk before, there will be a couple of points during second semester where parents will be able to opt their students back in if they want to. They're designated points because, again, we can't do that on a daily basis. So at the end of progress 1 will probably be one of those points, progress 2, and parents can opt back in. At that point, they can be tested. And as Pat discussed, even though there are no athletics right now, everything is virtual. If things do get better, and they begin to allow athletics and other extracurriculars, then we do have the ability to require testing for that because we would not be taking somebody's property right to attend school away in an extracurricular like activity like we would be doing in school. Does that help, Don?
Yep.
Okay.
And I do have one more question when we get to the contract.
Okay.
And one other point, I mean, the question may come up from some of our residents, what if, mother and father want to be tested, for example? And so what we can do there is we can actually direct them to Passport Health.
Yes.
And they have a facility in Vernon Hills, very convenient. It's actually located right behind J.C. Penney's. And they can go there during the day, and if they want, they could arrange for their own testing. And honestly, it's very reasonable cost. You will not find this test anywhere else for that kind of money.
And then just a couple of other things that I think Pat touched on. So first is what would be the process? So there will be an enrollment process. This will all be rolled out very soon here, where you do an electronic consent to be tested and that you want to participate. Secondly, you have to download the app, the Abbott app that you're going to use. Then, as Pat demonstrated with his graphics, you'll have a Q code, and that will be your entree in. They'll have a scanner there when the students and the staff report. They'll scan that Q code, and then that spits out a label. That's how it helps everything happen. So there'll be more information on logistics, and Pat and I and Dr. Morcott from Passport Health will be working on very shortly having a virtual town hall for folks to attend. Dr. Morcott will cover the test and the scientific piece. Pat and I will do our piece of that, and then we'll take questions from there. So the process as we get it started is it's very efficient moving forward. And again, that allows us to do that. Now, one of the questions that the board members may be asked as we start to talk about this, because students and staff have to be scheduled for the same time every week. So what our schedulers are looking at, working with Passport, is attempting to be as minimally disruptive to the school day as they can be. However, in order to do that, not all students, may have a study hall on their Monday on half day. That might be their testing day. So they may have to be out of class 15 minutes or a passing period plus some time and go back. But the beauty of this, it is truly a very quick in and out of experience because of the technology that's being leveraged with doing the testing. And secondly, we strongly believe that it allows us to open and it gives us better probability to stay open. So if you want to look at it this way, that minimal disruption is part of the cost of doing business for us continuing to have school. And it will be important for folks to understand that. So Pat, I think it covers that. And Don, I think had another question. I'm sorry, Don, I may have cut you off.
No, it has to do with the contract, but Lisa's got one.
Lisa looked like she had a question too.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
You brought up something I was going to ask about, and it also was mentioned in the contract about accommodating teacher schedules for testing. Because while it's workable for a student who's in the building to step out for 15 minutes to complete their weekly test, I wonder how that's going to work for teachers, and can Passport accommodate us so that our teachers can schedule a convenient time? Because I'm assuming they'll be as enthusiastic as anyone about the testing process and the additional mitigation it offers.
So that's a great question, Lisa. And the answer is yes. They will accommodate teachers. It will be a fast in and out. And remember, every teacher has a plan period as part of their contract during the week. They also have, it's a duty-free lunch period, which we don't want to disturb, obviously. But they also have a duty place in their schedule. So there will be more opportunities in smaller numbers with teachers to be able to do that. So that's something that Dr. Morcott and Pat and I talked about. And actually Dr. Morcott brought up because they've done some of this mass testing with another vehicle in several other districts. So we're only one of the districts that they're working with. We just happen to be the one that has Binex now, right now.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. I have one other follow-up, unless Don, was there something along those lines that you wanted to ask about? So the other question that I had, you mentioned that if someone has a positive test, that through this Binax rapid test, it's only a presumptive positive, meaning they need another test in order for it to be conclusive.
Lisa Hassel, School Board.
While somebody is in that presumptive period, are they, regardless of who they are they excluded from the building until their test confirms whether or not they're actually positive?
Okay, so I think the details of that are really still being worked out. We've talked a lot about that because we don't want to waffle there. We want to be really clear. So a couple things. I think if the person, one thing that still needs to be nailed down for sure is if you look at the contract, what the contract actually says, if you get a presumptive positive and you are symptomatic, we're going to treat you as positive. Okay.
I think it says if you're symptomatic or if you have a known exposure to a positive case.
Yeah. So I think it still needs to be finalized whether or not that's actually going to be treated as a presumptive or whether we're going to confirm that as well. All right. Clearly, if you are asymptomatic, we're going to confirm it. So we're still working through those specific logistics. Imagine student comes down, and what we expect, we're going to schedule these appointments, or at least a proposal is in half-hour blocks. All right. So basically what will happen is they'll come down to the testing area, and in the first 15 minutes, they should get tested and then go back to class. In the second 15 minutes, the nurse will finish the actual testing and report the results. Okay. So I'm a student. I've come down. I got my test done in 15 minutes. I go back to class. Probably in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to get pinged on my Navica app that's either going to say I'm negative or positive. If I'm positive, I'm probably going to go back down to the testing site and say, hey, again, that presumptive positive doesn't tell me I'm positive. It just really tells me I got to return to the testing site.
So I don't think they're relying on the app to notify people. I think what the contract says is if they're positive, they get a call.
They're going to get a call if they're
two positives,
they're true positive.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. So if they get a second positive, and Pat's right, and I know that LHS and Vernon Hills are both working on protocols, but the nurses will be involved likely. If they can't do the secondary Binax test based on their licensing for Illinois and what they're able to do, then they would put on PPE and escort the student back down to be tested a second time at the test center. At that point, if you have two positives, you're presuming, Pat, I think I'm correct here. If they have two positives, then, that's a different circumstance, and then they'll be taken into, kind of the waiting area for the parents to pick them up, and if necessary, be tested again, which can again be done at Dr. Morcott's place or anywhere else.
That's great. And I trust that the details of the protocol and how it's going to work out, you guys are more than capable of working that out. I just didn't know if any of that was already available so that we can communicate that. But if it's
I think right now you can communicate that an initial positive will be treated as a presumptive positive, which will be confirmed, let's say, before we go into a full-blown quarantine contact tracing mode.
Got it. Okay.
And that second test, again, that also has to be finalized here, but it will either be a second Binax Now test, or I think more likely we may run what's called ID Now, which is an amplified test. It's not PCR, but it's more like PCR. Because if you're using two different technologies and you get two positives, it's even less likely that it's a false positive.
Sure.
So again, we're looking at the logistics of that. Either way, I think would be very acceptable.
Okay. I agree with you, and I appreciate that you're working out those details. Thanks.
Yeah, and we agree. We don't want to. We want to nail those details, frankly, this week, so that then hopefully by next week we can hold these public forum sessions, because we know there's going to be a whole lot of questions.
Sure.
And we don't want to waffle on any of that. We want to make sure.
No. I think it sounds like you guys are clear that we have to set the expectations of what to expect throughout the process. It's clear that you're thinking through that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
How are we handling contact tracing?
So we're working out that with Passport Health as well.
Okay. So not through the Lake County Health Department.
Well, they will be responsible for any and all reporting to Lake County Public Health. Okay. That was actually one of the reasons that we were driven to the, I'll call it on-site sampling protocol versus the home health version.
Right.
we were just a little more confident that working with Passport Health, a local provider that we deal with directly, that we would make sure we could comply with all of the reporting requirements. So that's basically one of the key things they're getting paid to do.
But we'll, Pat and Don, we'll still be doing the contact tracing. Our nurses at both buildings will be working on the contact tracing and working with Lake County Health Department, just like we've been doing now. So calling families and students and staff and stuff like that, we'll be doing that. So,
and the one thing we need to continue to amplify in unity here is that if and when we need to do contact tracing, which is inevitable in most likelihood, even if it's in small numbers, it's really important that we encourage parents and students to work with us on, or the Lake County Health Department, on contact tracing. So when we call, we don't get a response, sorry, don't call me again, I'm not interested. That contact tracing becomes a very, very important part of this process when we're working with small numbers of people, but certainly with the number of people, the numbers of people that we're going to have in both of the buildings, including the staff. So that'll be part of our messaging. I'll work on that. Perhaps John and I and, Tom will work on messaging together on that from the district and the two buildings to encourage people to do that. But, we have encountered a bit of that, and that's not only frustrating, but it's very challenging for following up on those cases. So all good points.
Karen Lundstedt, Secretary.
Can I ask another question? Do we have clear protocols in place for before they're even tested about exposure and what's required of students and staff, whether they can or can't come to school if they've been, say, for instance, if someone in their household has COVID, or if they've had a known exposure to someone with COVID, they
then
have to stay home?
Yeah, Karen, we've been working, obviously, our nurses and I've been working with our staff and our students, because we've obviously had staff in the building, we've had students in the building.
Sure.
And so they've been working, and following all the, the procedures and protocols set forth by IDPH, so the Illinois Department of Public Health, and then Illinois State Board of Education. So, looking at that, whether somebody is a positive case on when they can return, some of that information on when they can return depends on, when they had symptoms, when they tested positive, maybe even getting a release letter from Lake County Health Department for them to return. If they were a close contact, then their quarantine date, so we work with, the individual and Lake County Health Department, and we're still following the 14-day quarantine. So I know, people have read that there's a shorter quarantine. We're still on the 14-day quarantine. That's what IDPH and Illinois State Board of Education still says.
Brian Kelly, Associate Superintendent.
For the dates for that. So we've been doing that all along since, the summer, we had contact days, we had summer camps, and we had driver's education. So we've been doing that all along. And, anytime there's any changes from ISBE or IDPH, we follow up and follow those. So.
I know, and Don, I don't know if I know you and your wife were more having it together, but I know, like, for our family, when I had it, and then my husband had to wait to start his 2-week quarantine until after I was no longer contagious, which was a whole, it just gets a little confusing, and it really stretches out, because then he ended up having a 3-week period where he couldn't be in contact with anyone because he had to wait. He couldn't start his 2 weeks until I was no longer contagious.
Yeah, there are some cases that you could be somebody that is a close contact, and actually your quarantine date will last longer than somebody that actually had COVID.
Yeah.
You could also, depending if you have a younger child at home that you can't quarantine or isolate from at home, that your quarantine date is going to be a lot longer also. So yeah, there's a lot of, but again, we, talk to every individual. Again, Cam Trout and Kajal, Diane, and Elisa at Libertyville, they do a great job in talking to everyone and making sure, that we're all on the same page. So,
yeah, I would expect you're going to get lots of questions and lots of confusion, but that's just life right now. Anyway, thank you.
Pat Grudy, President.
Okay. Any other questions?
Don Carmichael, School Board.
Okay.
Contract?
I can go ahead and give you that one question about the contract.
Sure.
Page 8, it's actually page 7 on, as it's written. It's the very last one where the signatures are. It just says Vernon Hills High School District 128. We might need to change that.
Oh yeah, we'll fix that. Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Good.
that's not a problem.
Prentice Lee Superintendent.
And interestingly, that the Daily Herald, even though the district officially changed its name with the state, Mary knows this, it's often very frustrating. We're officially Community High School District 128. As you know, the Daily Herald still calls this Libertyville, Vernon Hills Area School District 128. So even though our name was officially changed a number of years ago. So yeah, we'll fix that. Not a
I
problem.
just have one more question. It's just a small detail. When you mentioned the estimated testing volume, you used the population data from the first hybrid survey back in the fall. There was another survey due December 16th, and I'm wondering, have the numbers, Tom and John, have they changed much?
Pat Grudy, President.
That's right. I said I think the numbers are slightly higher, but I'll let those guys.
Not much.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Tom or John, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Libertyville, the numbers are roughly the same. About 75% of our students opting in, and about approximately the other 25% staying in full-time e-school.
And John, you were about the same as well once the doubles and triple responses were taken out, right? About the same number?
We gained maybe 3% to about 36, 37%.
Okay.
We anticipated maybe that we'd be higher than that, but that's about where we stayed. So that's where we're rolling with.
And Lisa, I actually, if you notice, I rounded the number up a little bit in the financial calculation. So I think that the actual calculation was 1,800 and something. My assumption was we're doing about 2,000 a week.
Pat Grudy, President.
Okay. All right. The contract does have a 30-day out clause. So if we decided in February that, we're seeing what we're seeing and we don't think we need to test, we can get out of it within 30 days. The one other thing I do want to mention, though, is that we are working with Passport Health. We may want to make a decision to secure material ahead of time, just to make sure that when it's available, we actually have it. We're not sure. We're going to kind of wait and see how that goes. If we did do that, we would obviously want to make them whole, so that if we tell them to buy material for us, and let's say, for example, one of their concerns is the governor does close the schools. All right. Obviously, if the governor closes the schools, we're not going to be doing testing. So we don't want to see the healthcare provider who basically purchased tests on our behalf lose out there. So they've reassured us that they would do everything, commercially reasonable to use those tests in other areas if they had to. But if it was a situation where they might get so-called stuck with that material, then we would probably need to make them whole. But that would be at a significantly reduced cost relative to the $20 per test cost. It'd be more like the $5 per test that is really what Abbott charges. Okay. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that, because I think strategically, as I've told people, I've been on both ends of this thing. Not unusual for salespeople to overcommit what production can deliver. So when we know we can get enough material, we may very well secure it, at least for a couple months out.
And they'll hold it for
right
us.
now. What we're hearing from the Abbott people is they feel confident they're going to be able to provide it. So there is no obvious risk at this point. So that's kind of where it stands with them.
But to your point, Pat, we just want to work with Scott and Dr. Morcott and monitor that, and then do what we need to do. And that's part of what you'll be giving Pat and I the latitude to work on. One other update, and then we can I'll give you a recommendation for approve the contract. And that is, I've talked for the last several meetings about vaccine for educational staff. And as you recall, for our 3 weekly meetings prior to the holiday season, the educational staff was still at the top of phase 2 with first responders for vaccines. So right before the holiday, the CDC moved educators up to phase 1B. So that's a higher level. So originally what we were told when we were at the top of phase 2 was that those vaccines, what CDC had communicated to the state health departments had communicated to county health departments, was that would probably be mid-March to the end of April. So right now we're waiting to find out, and Lake County is waiting to find out moving educators up to phase 1B, what does that mean date-wise? And then what does that mean holistically against, what seems to be a slowdown in the pipeline someplace in terms of getting vaccines out. So we have the superintendents have a weekly meeting with Executive Director Mark Pfister from Lake County Health Department. He's great to work with. He gives us the information that he has. And so we'll continue to monitor that, and I'll continue to update you on that. But of course, as soon as that's available, the county health department is going to want to try and get that to educators, and they'll set up a couple of sites, I'm told, in the county for educators to be able to go and get vaccinated. So that will be coming soon. Okay. So Pat, with that said, I'd like to recommend, along with you, that the board approve the contract with Passport Health for the Abbott Buy Next Now testing and to move forward with that.
Pat Grudy, President.
Is there a motion?
Pat Grudy, President.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All right. Any further discussion?
Yeah, hey Pat, this is Kevin. On the buy, you are going to buy as much product as possible, right? To hedge our bet.
So we haven't decided, Kevin, on an amount to buy. We know that Passport Health has already secured. I think they told us, Prentice, like 25,000 tests or something. So yes, we're certainly good here for the near term. Beyond that, we continue to investigate it to decide whether or not we should buy enough, let's say, to last us from now until March or what. So we haven't made a final decision on that, but we're still inquiring about
Kevin Huber, School Board.
Okay, because you said the potential downside is if the school's closed because the governor closes them. Is that the only downside?
Yeah, I mean, the only downside I see is if we bought enough material, let's say, to get through the end of March, so call that 4,000 tests in January, 8,000 tests in each February and March. So that's what, 8, 16, and 4, 20,000 tests. If the governor closes schools at the end of February, we're going to eat about 8,000 tests potentially. Although those could certainly be used if he then reopens the schools and we keep testing. But we'd be on the hook for, say, 8,000 tests at probably about $5 a piece.
All right. Yeah, I guess my other question on that, if the governor closes the schools, that means all hell's broken loose. And isn't the value of those tests then greater?
Yeah, and that's why, again, what Dr. Marcotte has assured us is he would certainly do everything he could to use those tests in, other areas. He may have a testing arrangement with a company or something like that. So he would certainly make every good faith effort to use up any inventory that he has, and then we would get credit for it.
Okay. Yeah, no, it sounds good. Like I said, I heard you say governor, and if that did happen, the value of those tests obviously should go up dramatically. And it's not like we're trying to profit off the test, but we certainly shouldn't be stuck with the $5.
Exactly. We would do everything we could to make sure we didn't get stuck with them. But I just want to highlight that so everybody's aware that, all right, there's always that risk.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Any other final questions? All right. If not, roll call, please.
Grudy.
Aye.
Hessel.
Aye.
Huber.
Aye.
Lundstedt.
Aye.
Rooney.
Aye.
Batson.
You're muted, Jim.
Muted.
Oh.
What's going on? Aye, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now.
Carmichael.
Aye.
All right. That's everybody, right? Motion carries. All right. Motion carries. All right. Thanks, everybody, for supporting that. All right, last but not least, let's talk about our January 11th committee and January 26th board meetings. All right, as I mentioned, today was the first day everybody's back. And I feel very strongly that now that our teachers and staff are back, we need to pivot to meeting in person. So I'd like to propose that our January 11th committee meeting be in person, as well as our January 26th board meeting be in person. Certainly willing to accommodate that. I know there are one or more of you who have healthcare concerns. So we are looking into, and I would expect to be able to do this meeting in a hybrid format. I have no issue with doing that. But in my communications with some of the building people and others, I think it's real important that we as a board, if we're asking our employees to be back, we need to be back too. So I want to throw that out for discussion. But frankly speaking, I'm going to emphasize discussion more so than debate.
Let me note one other thing. So if we're meeting in person, the max in the room at any time would be capped at 50, right? And that would include all of us, anybody that was at the meeting. And so if there was an audience that was 51 or more, then we would have to control entry and exit to the meeting, which we will certainly do. We will take all protocols in terms of spacing, wearing masks, remaining distanced while we meet. So everything that's in place for everything that we're doing in the schools for protocol, we would certainly do with the board meetings as well.
Yeah. And Prince, I'd just clarify that. I mean, it's up to 50, but I mean, it may not be 50 if we can't socially distance 50 people. I mean,
that's true.
So I'm thinking about let's say Vernon Hills Library. We may not realistically in a reasonable format be able to fit 50 people in there. So we could see what the capacity is, but it would certainly be within whatever guidelines exist.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the library. We could go someplace else in the building and meet as well. So, but your point is spot on, Pat.
Casey Rooney School Board.
So Pat, there's 148 people on this meeting right now. How are we going to accommodate? Because one thing I don't want to do is diminish the increased participation we've seen. Obviously, there's a deep interest in what's been going on this year, but participation is important, and I don't want to limit it in any way.
Well, totally agree. I mean, that's why, and again, I think we're working with the IT people to work through the logistics of this. It's not as simple as just doing a Zoom meeting, but I think at the end of the day, our meeting should be a hybrid meeting. So we should meet in person. One, I think it's a good thing to do. Two, I think it does show support for our teachers and staff for whom we have the same expectation. But two, I think we should continue a format such as this, where if 150 people want to log on and just listen to what we're doing, they still have access to do that. All right. So we're still working out the details of that with Mick and his team. But my expectation would be we would not limit it in any way to people that want to participate who may choose not to or otherwise be unable to show up in person. Yeah. Frankly, I would hope the community actually logs on instead of shows up, because, if we get 100 people that show up, we're not going to be able to accommodate 100 people, but we can have over 1,000 online. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I would expect we would still offer that alternative.
Bryant is working with Mick and the tech folks, and basically, you're live streaming and Zooming at the same time. And so there are a few logistical challenges. Our team is kind of the best in the business. So they're working through those dynamics right now to try and make that happen. So we'll continue to work on that.
So how do we handle public comment? Would they still have to email us and then we read them?
They could do either. If we're doing a parallel meeting, they could email them in, Mary can read them, or they could show up at public. Many of you know that District 70, for example, was meeting in person for a long period of time in the run-up to meetings. And, they had to hold people outside and then bring them in and let them do public comment. So we would be able to do both of those options, Casey, if we're able to pull this off.
So my guess is, simplicity-wise, just making this as efficient as possible, we would no longer have our committee meetings at one location and our board meetings at another. Would we try to just do this in one spot so that we have everything kind of more fluid, or would we still try to do one meeting at Libertyville and one at Vernon Hills?
We're still kind of working on the details of that. It depends on the amount of setup and stuff. So we like to still alternate it just like we have before. That's what we're kind of planning on, but we're still working on the details. So stay tuned.
And in a worst case scenario, if it's maybe not the most efficient to make that work in this really unique pandemic time, as long as people have access again, through a Zoom conversation, then your meeting location may not be as important as it normally would be in us switching back and forth. So more to follow.
Pat Grudy, President.
Okay, any other questions or comments on that? Please feel free.
So you're hoping to do this by next week?
We are hoping
Yes.
to do this by next week.
When do you need to know who's going to be in, who's not going to be in?
Just email me anytime beforehand so we know who's coming and who's not. And again, if you don't feel that you're able to attend, just email me. You know, I'm going to accept it as it is. Okay.
Don Carmichael, School Board.
That's fair.
Pat, I'm in agreement with you.
What's that?
I'm in agreement with you. I think that if we're going to ask our teachers to be in the building, that it is a good show of support. So I will support that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I did, you know, like I said, I did poll a few different people and I asked the question. It was pretty strong. That's true.
Well, my concern was already shared with that participation, but if we can handle the participation electronically, then.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would encourage community members that want to participate, and I hope they would do that online, because I really don't think we want to have 100 people show up and then have to deal with how many we can accommodate and how many we can't. And I honestly think we've been pretty effective communicating via Zoom to large numbers of community members, which has been great. But, you know, I'll respect their needs. I mean, frankly speaking, there's 11 people running for the board, and there may be 1 or 11 of them that want to show up and start to, you know, see firsthand what we're doing at our board meetings. And, you know, I think we honestly need to give them that opportunity as well.
And Pat, just to make this point, I think you may have touched on this earlier. The reason we're meeting remotely tonight or via Zoom is so that we could allow a maximum number of people to be here for the process of naming our new superintendent. So, you know, and coming out of a holiday and the timeliness of doing that. So if you get a question from that for somebody, well, why didn't you meet in person? Teachers were back. Why didn't you meet in person? Because we wanted to allow the maximum number of teachers and community members to be able to, you know, witness this great moment with Denise tonight, and a great moment for the district as well. So it's all good.
Jim Batson, VP.
I think the thing we need to keep in mind, though, is that we don't want, while it's a good thing to be in person and it's a good thing to show support, we also don't want people to feel shamed if they're not in attendance.
No, I agree with that.
And we need to, and I'm not saying that any of us would do that, but there are others that might. And I would just, you know, I would want us to all go into this with a very, you know, open mind about this. I will tell you, for next week, I have a conflict that's back-to-back Zoom meetings. So I won't be able to be in person because I'll either have to miss or I need to be remote in order to accommodate my other meeting that's immediately following. So
no, Jim, I think that's an important point, and that's an important point in a number of contexts. This came up as well when we were discussing the COVID testing. I mean, look, we have to deal with the situation. There's going to be some kid in calculus class or some other kid that all of a sudden is going to get a note that his or her Navica app is going to turn red. Okay. And so we as a community need to accept that that is not a bad thing. You are not, you know, you should not be treated negatively because that happens. All right. This is actually a good thing that we can identify this and we can take the action that we want to take in order to not only not spread it in our schools, but not spread it in our community. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. So it's another area where, look, we need the community's support to treat this kind of information appropriately. And we should not in any way, shape, or form, you know, criticize or otherwise inappropriately treat anybody who's taking the appropriate action, either due to their own personal situation or otherwise. Okay. I think that's just really, really important. So Jim, I agree with you 100%. You know, I certainly trust each and every one of you that will do what we think is right to do. But if you've got personal circumstances that prevent you from being in person, then we respect it for what it is. Okay.
Pat Grudy, President.
All right. Any other comments?
Prentice Lee, Superintendent.
All right.
Hey, Pat, before we stop, can we circle back to John and Pat and just have them share out kind of what the first day was
John and Tom.
Like, or John and Tom, John and Pat, John and Tom.
I
just have them comment a little bit on having staff back in the building today and, before we close tonight. So I don't know, John, do you want to start?
John Yao, principal.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Today was a good day. I'll just speak selfishly for a minute. I loved having people back. It's been kind of a lonely few months. Many of those months, I was at home with the rest, but I've been at school for some time with a crew there, and to have more faces in throughout the hallways and the classrooms was welcome. So that's selfishly, I felt great about it. And, to see the teachers in the classrooms teaching, my own daughter is in the high school, and she noticed right off the bat that her teachers were in a different spot. And of course, those teachers pulled off the same amount of magic that they have been. In just a moment of honesty, I do think it's worth just kind of saying, for some of these teachers, they're excited to be back. They're ready to be back. They were chomping at the bit to be back. But I think it's also fair to say that for a lot of people, I can't even say a lot of people, I don't even know the percent, but there are some people for which coming back has a certain amount of anxiety, right? They to come back to a place that is unknown in terms of some of the precautions we're taking. They've been at home. They've been, pretty conservative in their mobility, leaving their home, going, to see others, socialize. And now we're asking them to come back. And I'm just proud of them, because for those people to take that step to say, okay, I've been asked to come back. I want to serve our community, and I want to be with our kids, to come to work with smiles on their faces, to say, all right, here I am, let's go. I'm proud of them. And I know like I said, for some, it was an easy step. For others, it was a step filled with anxiety, but they were here teaching, and I thought it was a great day. So I really appreciated that.
Tom Coolentest, principal.
Tom?
Yeah, John said it beautifully. I echo and second everything he said. It was spot on. And same for LHS, both with the sense of pride that I felt, and I know many of our team members felt, but also that respect and that understanding and that empathy for people who are, taking this leap of faith and the trust in all of our mitigation factors to re-enter, what is, at the end of the day, a closed environment with a large amount of people going in and out each day. So we are all going to be strictly following all the mitigation pieces that are in place. We are grateful for the district to provide this extra level of mitigation. The more mitigations we have, the more confident we are that our buildings will remain open over the long run. And, in addition to all the great things John said, the one thing that stood out for me is what people may not understand is one of the reasons our schools are so great and our cultures are so strong is the way that our adult staff support and care for one another. Not only do they support and care for our students, but they truly care for and support their colleagues as individuals. And, there's been a lot of people in the buildings thinking about their colleagues over the months and just missing them and not being able to connect with them. And so that was a good feeling today to see people that we really care about, that we haven't been in touch with to the degree that we're used to. It was a great feeling.
Pat Grudy, president.
That's great. And actually, for Denise's benefit, one of the reasons we asked people to come back this week was we knew there would be anxiety. To me, that's completely understandable. And so what we had hoped was, with our teachers being able to come back, I'll call it early relative to our students, that would enable them to acclimate to the new environment, get more comfortable in the new environment, so that when the students do come back, they will already have made that transition and not only feel better about it themselves, but then they can help the students get through that transition as well. So, John, I'm glad you expressed that, because I think that's very understandable. I would certainly feel that way as well, because I haven't ventured out of the house hardly at all. So, but it sure would be good to get out.
It's all good.
All right. So I promised a short meeting. It wasn't the shortest, but it's better than most.
It was probably the shortest one we've had this year, Pat. So
Probably since COVID started.
You
Yeah.
did good.
Yes.
Actually, the longest one we've had this year, just to be clear.
This one was?
Had
Get
All
it,
right.
Pat?
He's starting the clock in 2021, obviously.
So if there's nothing else, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
second? Any further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Hessel,
Aye.
Huber,
Aye.
Lundstedt,
Aye.
Rooney,
Aye.
Batson,
Aye.
Carmichael,
Aye.
Grudy.
Aye. Is that it? All right, motion carries. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
See you next week.
Have a great
Aye.
Good night.